Okay, good morning, dear friends, and welcome to the main object big book study of Alcoholics Anonymous. I am an alcoholic. My name is David, so wonderful to see. Wow, 28 of you here at for us on the East Coast, 6:32 a.m. So appreciate you all being here, and I'm going to ask, or I did ask, our friend Nancy to read the AA preamble, and let me just bring that up for you, Nancy. It's here somewhere, I promise.
I have it. Good
Oh,
morning, everybody. I'm Nancy. I'm an alcoholic. Alcoholics Anonymous is a fellowship of people who share their experience, strength, and hope with each other that they may solve their common problem and help others to recover from alcoholism. The only requirement for membership is desire to stop drinking. There are no dues or fees for AA membership. We are self supporting through our own contributions. AA is not allied with any sect, denomination, politics, organization, or institution, does not wish to engage in any controversy, neither endorses nor opposes any causes. Our primary purpose is to stay sober and help other alcoholics to achieve sobriety. Thank you.
Nancy, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. And now I'm going to ask everybody to join me in inviting God into this meeting this morning with the Serenity Prayer. Dear God, grant us the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the courage to change the things we can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Amen. We are, as most people know, a line by line big book study, and what we do is we go through the book quite slowly, and by doing this, um, what we do is we really transform our relationship and to the book and our understanding of the big book, and we really unlock its potential as a powerful tool that we can then use to not just inform our own sobriety, but even more importantly, share this message with others. And one of the things, the little techniques that we use in order to do that, is we break the text down into, or we categorize it into five different categories. And here you go: questions, directions and explanations, promises, warnings, and then history. And as you may remember, the colors there are the highlighter colors that I use, and you can choose your own, of course. And that information, if you're trying to keep up with this, that'll be in the chat. Donna is being so kind as to post that stuff there. It'll be up eventually. And then and so as we go along, I'll let you know too. I'll give you a heads up. Hey, I think this is this or that. And then the format that we'll use today is I'll do my bit until about 7 or so. So about 20, 25 minutes. And then we'll open it up for comments and discussion. And last but not least, the meeting is as we normally do. We're recording this, and we will then just my part, so you don't have to worry about your comments being recorded because they won't. But then we post that on our YouTube channel that people can use as an archive or go back to if they miss a meeting or something like that. And so that's it. We are back in We Agnostics. We are on page 46. And I'm going to sort of summarize and bring up to date where we are now. So, when we last met, and we took last week off, so 2 weeks ago, in that previous section, Bill began to discuss the tremendous conflict many of us faced when initially presented with the idea that the only way we could survive is through a higher power. That created a conflict for us, for many of us, let me say. And that conflict was that, on the one hand, we at this point became fully convinced that we did need a higher power. On the other hand, the notion for many of us of surrendering our will and our lives over to a higher power, creating full reliance on some type of God, was an idea that many of us balked at or even strongly revolted. And so Bill understands this dilemma. If we recall from his own story, he struggled with this as well. But we can also recall that Ebby offered Bill a radical proposal that allowed him to move ahead. And now what we'll see in what we read today, Bill offers us the same proposal. And that proposal is that we don't need to consider another person's conception of God to make a start. We can move forward and make a beginning on our own conception of God. And that is sort of a foundational principle of our fellowship. And our own conception of God, as he goes on to discuss, would allow us to begin working the steps. And most importantly, by doing that, we start to experience the benefits of a spiritual way of life. And Bill concludes the section we'll read today by affirming that our own conception of God can serve as a powerful cornerstone. In other words, while we will eventually need to expand this conception, our own idea of God will allow us to begin the journey. And that last point, I'm just going to say, that last point I think is it may seem like a fine distinction, but it's a key distinction that often gets missed. And by missing that, I think it hinders moving forward and more deeply into the steps in a way that we need to in order to experience a life of being happy, joyous, and free. And so, all that said, we are on, as I mentioned, page 46. And we are on the first full paragraph, which begins around the middle of the page, where it's, yes, we have agnostic temperament. And Bill has just presented us with the conflict, the paradox. We need a higher power, but we revolt at the idea of a higher power. And he says, now this first two sentences, by the way, I have as explanations, so they're in green for me. Yes, we of agnostic temperament have had these thoughts and experiences. Let us make haste to assure you. So there are, what I take from that is I take two pieces of direction. The first that I take, of course, is he's assuring the newcomer that many of us struggled with this as well. So if we're encountering somebody who struggles, we're not saying, what's your problem? Get with the program, dude. And instead, we're offering them assurance. The other thing, the other piece of direction that I think is important is, on a larger sense almost, you can see what Bill is doing is he always, and we saw this earlier on, he balances hard facts with empathy and compassion. So remember, I mean, nowhere in this first 164 pages do I see the phrase, sit down, shut up, take the cotton out of your ears, and put it in your mouth. If anybody knows, if I missed it somewhere, somebody point it out to me. But Bill does not do that. He doesn't shy away from the hard facts. But when he gives them, he also says, listen, we struggled with this as well. Now, the rest of this paragraph I have as a promise. So it's in blue. We found that as soon as we were able to lay aside prejudice and express even a willingness to believe in a power greater than ourselves, we commenced to get results, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power, which is God. I think there are several key things here. He is promising that, yes, we have to have a God of our own understanding. But he's saying, if we can lay aside prejudice. And what is prejudice? We defined that the last time we were here, and I got it from the 1939 dictionary. It is prejudgment without due examination. That's a fancy way of saying contempt prior to investigation. And I think Bill's point is that those presumptions, that prejudice blocks us. It blocks the Spirit. But look at what he says a little further down. He says, in the last several lines there of the paragraph, even though it was impossible for any of us to fully define or comprehend that power. What he's saying is you can make a start with a concept or an idea of a higher power that is incomplete and fragmentary. In fact, you don't even have to have an idea of a higher power. All you need is the willingness to form an idea of a higher power, a sincere willingness. In effect, what he's saying is, if you can use a metaphor of a house, you don't need to decorate the room. You just need to open the door. So, and that's enough. So, moving onward, the next paragraph, the next several sentences, and I'll point them out as we go, are, again, directions. Much to our relief, we discovered we did not need to consider another's conception of God. Bear in mind, this was written in 1939. America, and the world for that part, culture was very different than it is today. Church and religious affiliation were huge. It was a large part of the average American's identity. And there are even, I have friends who live in the South today, and they will even say to me that I've even heard it said that in some parts of the South, when you meet somebody, like at a convenience store or Walmart or somewhere, they'll say, "Hi, I'm so-and-so, I go to Episcopal Church. What church do you go to?" And now, I don't know if that's every conversation, and I'm sure it's not, but that mindset was common in America at the time that this was written. And with each religion or each church, you had a certain set of fixed beliefs or doctrines. And what Bill is saying is, in effect, we have no hard and fast rules about a higher power. You can develop your own to begin. So we'll see. Our own conception, however inadequate, was sufficient to make the approach, and to effect a contact with him. And I think that's an important distinction too. So not only do you have the option of developing your own conception of a higher power, that conception can be not just fragmented, not just partial, it can be flawed and incomplete. And in my case, I'm thinking back about when I first started to think about using a higher power in AA. And let's just say the idea of a higher power I had then versus today is radically different. And in many ways, well, I didn't have much of a conception of a higher power. My brain was so scrambled. All I knew was there was something bigger than myself. And if you'll recall, I'm just going to shift focus for a moment. Our 12 and 12 in step 2 talks about the notion that at first our higher power may be the group. Then it may be our sponsor. Then it may be this divine being. But it's just, what's important is that it's not us. And I am going to, let me do this. I'm going back to our little spiral here, because what's important is that, remember these 4 components that we see in Bill's story and in Dr. Bob's story, these 4 components of this spiral. And I think this notion of a higher power obviously starts to form the basis of the spiritual design for living that we see at the 6 o'clock position. It allows us to adapt to that. But I think also the importance of this notion is it really helps to sustain and solidify the ego deflation by putting somebody else or something else in charge of our lives. And as we see through Bill's story and Dr. Bob's, those are 2 really important ideas. So anyway, moving forward, as soon as we admitted the possible existence of a creative intelligence, a spirit of the universe, the underlying totality of things. Now, up till then, I have it as direction. The rest of this paragraph I have as promise. So you could even, I mean, if you wanted to put the rest of, and I put the first part of that sentence as direction, because what he is telling us, he is directing us to admit the possible existence. Again, we don't have a full conception of what that existence is, but we're opening the door. So as soon as we have that, and then the rest of this is promise, we begin to be possessed of a new sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. And let's not shortchange that last bit that we just read. Other simple steps. And he is talking, he's not just talking about 1, 2, and 3. He's talking about 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Because remember, the spiritual awakening comes where? Well, it can come at any point. The notion or a feeling of a relationship can come, but the real awakening comes with 12. So we began to be possessed of a new power, of a sense of power and direction, provided we took other simple steps. We found that God does not make too hard terms with those who seek him. To us, the realm of spirit is broad, roomy, all-inclusive, never exclusive or forbidding to those who earnestly seek. That means there is a sincere desire, willingness, and I would even go on to say vulnerability. It is open, we believe, to all men. It's open to everybody. My first higher power, I think I may have told this story here. I can't remember. I was given I had no concept of God or a higher power, and somebody at my home group, Cape May City group, at the time gave me a card that had the Lord's Prayer on one side and it had the St. Francis prayer on the other. And she said, just pray these prayers every day on your knees, and that'll help you start. And I didn't know what else to do. So I would get on my knees and I would say the prayers, and I said to myself, because I lived in this sort of roughly refurbished attic. And so it had this really snazzy, bright brown 1970s paneling. And everybody remembers that, right? And so I would get on my knees and I would stare at the wall, which was this snazzy, bright brown paneling. And I would say, I'm praying to the paneling. And because that was my only, that's all it felt like. I'm just saying these words to the paneling. But I was willing, I was really seeking. I was really reaching out. And unfortunately, when I began, the only thing I could reach out to was the paneling. But I kept doing it. When I got up and when I went to bed. Day after day. And I don't know how long it was. It was maybe a month. It could have been 2 months. But I remember on my knees, praying to the paneling, realizing, hold it, I feel something. It was an opening. It was a door opening inside of me. It was the beginning of a relationship. And so even a conception of a higher power that is a 4x8 piece of paneling is sufficient to make a start. Okay, we're at the top of 47. And the first two sentences there I have again as direction. So in green. When therefore we speak to you of God, we mean your own conception of God. This applies to other spiritual expressions which you find in this book. Now, I want to highlight an important distinction that will sometimes get lost, because what Bill is telling us is, remember, who was the book intended for? The book was intended for people who were being introduced to the AA program. It was to spread the word for people who otherwise might not have access to our fellowship. So people who were starting out. And the assumption was that when you're starting out, you would read the whole book. So as you read this, person who is just starting out, use your own conception. And if you encounter anything else that has to do with God or a higher power, use your own conception there too, because that's enough to make a start. And I guess the important distinction I'm trying to make is that we start there, yes, but we don't stay there. That idea gets developed. But for the time being, the next sentence is about sweeping away prejudice. That is a warning. Do not let any prejudice you may have against spiritual terms deter you from honestly asking yourself what they mean to you. And so that's a warning. The next, this paragraph, by the way, is a little bit of a hodgepodge. There's several things in there. So there's a warning. The next sentence is a direction. So back to green. At the start, this was all we needed to commence spiritual growth, to affect our first conscious relation with God as we understood him. So what Bill is saying, and notice that he capitalizes God and him. So what he's saying is, even though it's our own conception, that conception, if openly and honestly pursued, will connect us with the divine being that unites us all. The next sentence is a promise. Afterwards, we found ourselves accepting many things which then seemed entirely out of reach. That was growth. What he's alluding to is we start with our own conception, and then over time, we begin to adopt ideas that may come from other sources, primarily other steps or other parts of the book. Or, as he says, many of us return to a religion of our youth. So it could be there. It could be in a formal religion. But what he's saying is we start here, but then we develop it. And then, and he says that was growth. And then, okay. And then the rest of the sentence, sorry for mixing it up here so much, gang. The rest of this paragraph, rather, is direction. But if we wish to grow, we had to begin somewhere. So if we used our own conception, however limited it was. So that's green. Now, we get to pull out the lonely orange highlighter because we have a question. We don't use the orange highlighter that much, so but the most of the next 3 lines are questions. We need to ask ourselves but one short question. Do I now believe, or am I even willing to believe, there is a power greater than myself? And that's an important question, and you could almost consider it step 1.5 or step like pre-step 2, because we've done step 1, we've bought into all of step 1. This gets us on the way to step 2. Do we have that belief? And then the next sentence is in green for direction. As soon as a man can say that he does believe or is willing to believe, we emphatically assure him that he is on his way. And then we close it out with a promise. It has been repeatedly proven among us that upon this simple cornerstone, a wonderfully effective spiritual structure can be built. And Bill closes out, this is where we'll end today. But so the section closes out with Bill establishing a point that I took a lot of my thinking from today. This is a cornerstone. Nobody lives in a cornerstone. We live in a building. So we live in a structure, what he's saying. And so the cornerstone is where we start, but we build and expand from there. So again, the one thing that I will say too is, yes, this section is absolutely written for the newcomer. And at the same time, any of us can, this is open to any of us, no matter where we are in the journey. And I've shared a little bit about my own story. At 30 years sober, I realized that I was quite surprised to find that through my own choices and self-will, I basically became, without realizing it, I became an agnostic and started to doubt the experience of God. And then talks about the certain low spots ahead, and I hit a certain low spot. And thank God I did not drink. But what I needed to do was I needed to rebuild my spiritual foundation. And I started where I was with what I believed, and then slowly began to rebuild that foundation. So we can do this at any point. So with that, what I'm going to do, I see John, I see your hand, and I am going to offer you 3 questions just to reflect. If you want to share on this, you can. And that is, first, when I first started in AA, what struggles of, if any, did I have in adopting a higher power? 2, what initial benefits did I experience with this higher power? And 3, how does my current idea of a higher power differ from the one I started out with? And so chew on that, and then what we'll do is we'll open it up.